Russia has recently announced a move that changes the security map of Eastern Europe. President Vladimir Putin has confirmed the deployment of strategic missiles in Belarus, that is, outside the territory of the Russian Federation, and directly in an area that borders the North Atlantic Alliance. This isn't an exercise or temporary equipment transfer. Available information shows this is a real deployment in an allied country, bringing Russian military capabilities closer to NATO territory. Belarus is becoming a place from which Russia can respond more quickly than before in the event of a crisis. This shift heightens sensitivity in the region where Moscow's and the West's security interests intersect. Such transfers of strategic capabilities are usually carried out very cautiously and with minimal public communication, precisely to avoid unnecessary reactions and escalation. This makes it all the more striking that this step was confirmed openly. Deploying strategic missiles outside Russian territory is uncommon. That's why it immediately drew the attention of analysts and political leaders in Europe and raises questions about how the security situation in the region will develop further. In a broader context, this is a precedent that goes beyond the region of Eastern Europe itself and is being watched by security circles outside the continent as well. Russian officials state that Oreshnik missile systems are now deployed in Belarus. Moscow has confirmed it is transferring strategic weapons outside its territory as part of cooperation with the Belarusian regime. Russian authorities emphasize that the deployment took place in accordance with agreements between Moscow and Minsk, and that Belarus provided the necessary infrastructure for their placement. At the same time, it is stated that this is not a temporary rotation or an exercise, but a more permanent deployment as part of joint defense. The exact number of missiles and their specific locations have not been disclosed by the Russian and Belarusian sides. However, in the case of strategic systems, such a procedure is common and is related to the effort to maintain operational ambiguity. The extent of the deployment cannot be precisely quantified yet, but the mere confirmation of the deployment creates a new fact that security planners have to work with even without detailed information. The deployment of these missiles means that Russian strategic capabilities are physically moving closer to the borders of the North Atlantic Alliance. This shifts the regional force distribution and reduces the distance between the deployment site and NATO member states. From Moscow's point of view, this is a step that fits into the long-declared cooperation with Belarus in the field of security. However, this decision has a wider regional impact, affecting not just Russia-Ukraine relations, but the whole security structure in Eastern Europe. The deployment of missiles in Belarus is not just a technical measure. It is a step that changes the reality on the map and creates a new fact that all countries in the immediate vicinity must take into account. Belarus's geographical location plays a key role in its selection as a deployment site. The country sits between Russia and NATO's eastern border, serving as a natural bridge connecting Russian territory to NATO. Militarily, placing strategic missiles in Belarus reduces distances and reaction times. The territory of Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia is thus closer to Russian capabilities than it was when they were deployed exclusively on Russian territory. This is a purely geographical fact that changes the planning parameters on both sides. For NATO countries, this confirms that Belarus can no longer be seen merely as a political ally of Moscow, but as an active military space involved in daily security. At the same time, Belarus is not a neutral country. Since the war in Ukraine began, it has been tied to Russian military infrastructure and used as a staging area for Russian operations. The deployment of strategic missiles deepens this trend even further and formally shifts Belarus into the position of an extended military space for Russia. The political dimension is also important. By moving strategic weapons to Belarus, Moscow is showing that it considers Minsk to be a fully integrated security partner, willing to bear the risks associated with such a step. Russia is increasing its ability to send signals toward NATO from a wider area without redeploying its forces at home. From the perspective of regional security, this is not just a question of one specific weapon system. The deployment of additional strategic capabilities confirms and deepens the way in which Belarus is gradually being integrated into the Russian military strategy. This shift is also significant for neighboring countries, which increasingly have to take Belarus into account in their planning as an extended military space of Russia. Oreshnik missile deployment in Belarus aligns with Moscow's increasingly frequent strategic approach in recent years. Oreshnik is one of the new Russian missile systems designed for strategic deployment and is officially designated as a system capable of carrying a nuclear payload. It's not only about the weapons transfer, but also how Russia signals its readiness and resolve to the West. Oreshnik is a system that is perceived as part of Russia's strategic deterrent capability. Its deployment outside the territory of the Russian Federation, therefore, has primarily a political and psychological dimension. Moscow is thus showing that it is ready to expand the area from which it can operate, and that it does not see security boundaries strictly where today's state borders are. In this context, it is not only what a particular system can technically do that matters, but also where it is located and what signal its presence sends. The deployment of strategic missiles in Belarus increases uncertainty in the region, and at the same time creates pressure without a direct military confrontation. For Moscow, this is a way to strengthen deterrence while also testing the reactions of Western countries. This is a step that is visible but at the same time leaves many details unclear, which is intentional and common with strategic systems. It is precisely in this combination of visibility and ambiguity that the main message of this step lies. Russia is signaling that it is ready to change the reality on the map, but at the same time it leaves room open for political maneuvering and further developments in the situation. Reactions to Russian missile deployment in Belarus have remained restrained so far. Western countries are monitoring the situation closely but are avoiding immediate statements that might escalate tensions. Official statements emphasize the need to monitor the situation and maintain stability in the region. The North Atlantic Alliance is also expressing itself cautiously for now. NATO has long declared that it is monitoring the security environment on the eastern flank and that it has mechanisms in place to protect its member states. At the same time, however, at this stage, it is not a step that would automatically trigger an immediate military response. Silence and cautious replies are themselves a strong signal. They indicate that Western countries are trying to avoid escalation and do not want to enter into a rhetorical confrontation that could increase tensions or narrow the space for political maneuvering. In practice, this means that a large part of the responses is moving behind the scenes to the level of intelligence services, diplomatic contacts, and military planning, which are not publicly visible. From the perspective of regional security, the deployment of missiles in Belarus represents another step in the gradual shifting of the boundary. None of this is considered standard in Europe. This is not a sudden change or an immediate threat, but rather a continuation of a trend that increases the complexity of the security environment and places new demands on planning on both sides. With this step, Belarus is further anchored in the Russian military architecture and becomes a factor that neighboring countries must take into account in the long term. How the situation will develop further will depend not only on Moscow's next steps, but also on the reactions and decisions of Western countries in the coming months.
Thank you. If you liked the video, I would appreciate a like and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next ones I'm currently working on. Support my work with gratitude and click praise to help the video reach more people. Thank you.